Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Gary Kim, PTC'13 Program Committee Co-Chair and Editor of IP Carrier, as well as the session's keynote panelists.
Okay, so thanks for showing up. Appreciate you being here. I was going to give a little shout out. I've been doing this for about 4 years, and I absolutely never until this year realized how much work actually goes into putting one of these things together. Now, I'll give you an example. There is this huge spreadsheet. It's actually an activity or a workflow chart, 100 and some odd pages, that sort of describes every time block on every day, beginning from several days before the conference until immediately afterwards. It tells where every single staff person who's volunteering or employed by PTC has to be at every hour of every day, where every speaker is supposed to be, literally down to which part of this building we're supposed to be in every day. And so you can imagine it's scores and scores of people participating to get this thing put together. So if you see anybody today, and there are people behind this curtain, there are people out in the registration area, there are people behind the cameras, there are people doing the TV shoots, there are caterers, there are security people. Anybody who's working with PTC today, just tell them, fist bump on the shoulder, great job, because there are literally scores of people that you'll never see that actually work to a spreadsheet that big. So what we're going to do today is actually undetermined, because I can't remember why I created this topic. It was quite some number of months ago, but I've got some panelists that I've been working with for a couple of days, and we've had some really good conversations. So what I'm going to ask them to do is open with a couple of introductory remarks, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Mr. Etoh, you want to start?
Should I go first?
Sure.
Okay, let me introduce my company first, then I'd like to put my opinions about Wi-Fi versus mobile. So NTT DOCOMO is a software leading company in Japan that has only 60 million subscribers. But speaking of revenues, that has fourth positions next to China Mobile, Verizon, and AT&T. So from my positions, I have to say mobile must be important. Then the topics given is Wi-Fi versus mobile. So from my perspectives, Wi-Fi offloading is becoming more important, more and more. Nowadays, most of operators are suffering from lack of capacities. Capacity is more important for nowadays after the emergence of iPhone 2007. Then, having said that, so when talking about Wi-Fi offloadings, we have set the clear distinction between indoor environment and outdoor environment. Indoor environment, so Wi-Fi offloading is imperative. We have to do that. Indoor Wi-Fi offloading is very appreciated for most of operators. But speaking of outdoor offloading, I have strong concerns about the futures. So speaking about downtown Tokyo, 50% of Wi-Fi channels are interferenced against each other. That means we have just less than 50% efficiency in downtown Tokyo outdoor. Indoor is okay, but outdoor, sooner or later in New York, in Shanghai, in Beijing, in major cities, you will have Wi-Fi channel interference. So in the long run, we have to bring some new technologies, such as LTE Advanced. So LTE Advanced will be the combination of different spectrums, say 2 GHz for macrocell, or 8 megahertz for macrocell, or 1.5 or 1.6 gigahertz for small cells. That's layered structures. So that kind of new architectures will solve the congestion of mobile communications. So then, speaking of untethered things, in my understanding, 80% or maybe 90% of iPads are untethered in US. Even in Japan, maybe 70% or 60% of iPads are untethered. So most of our customers using iPad or large-scale tablets using in indoor environment. However, most of us also appreciate the always-on, always connected connectivities that mobile enables. So mobile is still very important for us. Then we will seek the best mix of mobile connection and untethered connections. Then lastly, speaking of fixed mobile operators, your chance exists in backhaul connection and also last mile connections using maybe WiMAX or wireless connections, blah, blah, blah. So last mile, maybe backhaul connections will be a chance for fixed telecommunication operators. Thanks, that's it.
Great, thanks. Norm, got any thoughts for us?
Sure. For those of, good morning, everybody. For those of you that haven't had a chance to meet yet, my name is Norman Fekrat. My background is mostly consulting to the industry. I've spent 19 years at Accenture and several years at IBM, always focused on consulting to the carrier side of the business. And when you talk a little bit about mobility versus untethered, the Wi-Fi strategy, from my perspective, is really a data offload strategy from a carrier's perspective. You have to ask yourself why, right? And when you ask yourself why, it's about moving data tonnage off of the mobile network. Now, why would you want to move data tonnage off of the mobile network? It's because data costs too much on the mobile network. So the carriers have a very aggressive offloading strategy to, when there's Wi-Fi coverage, to default those devices, whether they're mobile phones, tablets, onto the Wi-Fi network to reduce data tonnage and load on the spectrum and also on the backhaul. So that's number one. The second point that I would kind of like to make is, the question is Wi-Fi or untethered, which one's going to win, or what's the right strategy for both? Obviously mobility is always going to be a need, but when you look at some of the statistics, a lot of people are stationary when they're using their mobile devices, hence a untethered strategy exists. But when you really look at what needs to happen on the industry dynamics, when you look at the cost of data from a mobility perspective and then trying to offload it, I'm almost going to say neither one is the one that's going to win, because the current mode of mobility today for LTE and data and mobile video is so expensive when you look at it from a cost per gigabyte perspective and a carrier's profitability per gigabyte perspective. So they want to offload it off the network. So the point that I want to make is mobility and data needs, the approach and solution to it really needs to be re-engineered to support the economics that are required for our industry. So something different needs to happen. The traditional way of mobility, it doesn't look like the economics are supportive for video, for example. And the Wi-Fi offload strategy really isn't a carrier-grade solution today. It's becoming one. But it's been mostly used to data offload and reduce data tonnage in the network. So to the point where the mobile networks can carry mobile video at a high enough quality and from a profitability perspective, then mobility will really be able to support the true content types and data demands that are out there. And just to kind of, the underlying tone there is that, broadband, mobile broadband, needs to be re-engineered for internet-type economics. And the mobile platforms out there, the cell sites, all the backhaul needs to be just done over the internet. And there's some initiatives going on in the industry that are pushing the mobile packet core all the way out to an enterprise small cell, where you connect to the small cell through your mobile connection, but all the backhaul is just done over the enterprise LAN and over the internet. So I think you're going to start to see some very innovative solutions out there that are going to kind of bridge the gap between traditional mobility and some of the Wi-Fi offloading mechanisms today to really drive towards the profitability and reducing the cost per gigabyte for video and improving the profit per gigabyte.
So Andy's from Google, and I know you want to hear what Andy has to say. So Andy, you got the floor.
Good morning. Andy Warner from Google. I work on an interesting team at Google. We actually have an access team that works from the edge of our network out towards consumers and businesses, really focused on improving the experience, making sure that people have a fast connection, it's high quality, it's affordable in local terms, and that they have relevant content and other pieces. So we work quite closely with carriers, operators of all flavors, regulators, other people in industry around the world to try and really refine business models and address some of the structural challenges out there to make sure that operators are making good revenues, offering services that consumers and businesses are really interested in, and they're making enough to reinvest. We need a good connection. We're an online company, so the better connectivity people have to us, the better it is for us and presumably for everybody in the middle as well. And we really try and work with the entire chain there to find nice, clean, better solutions to get more people online and improve their experience. So addressing a lot of these issues, the tethering, the various mobile aspects, ways to reduce costs to ship bits back and forth are part and parcel of many of our conversations.
I just remembered, frankly, what the question was that prompted for putting this panel together, and that was last spring, I think it was, and we normally start planning for the next year's conference pretty early. The question I had was, what is the actual strategic role of the fixed network in a world where mobile seems to be the way that most of us are consuming our messaging, more of our content, more of the remote control features for our lives? And it wasn't clear to me what the actual right answer should be with that. And in fact, it's interesting. Min, you talked the other day about smart ARPU, which I think is a very clever and valuable term, and at the same time said best effort internet is also the best way to go. It's simple, people understand it, and it's not complicated. So we have both what I would call dumb pipe and smart app and smart revenue strategies, but basically married together. It's not like, should the network be dumb or smart? Well, it basically should be dumb, but the applications should be very smart.
Okay. I'm not saying we have to bring a smart pipe. Dumb pipe is okay. Okay, this is the field. Anyway, so I'm not saying we are not passing a smart pipe in general. Okay, good pipe and good customer bases. By utilizing customer bases, we can sell our services to general populations. That we call the smart ARPU, generally speaking.
So it's sort of defining it in terms of your customer base, which is the mass consumer in the Japanese market rather than business to business at the top. Okay. So Andy, Google, of course, and we were talking about this earlier, basically wants everyone to have broadband as fast as possible because that's what Google wants for the world, for reasons related to Google's business model, of course. But what Google wants really is big pipes and don't constrain them, is my guess.
Yes, it certainly depends where in the world you're looking at. When you go to the interior of Africa, other places, there are more pressing concerns. So when we say everyone, it tends to more be those people who are well beyond subsistence and have the ability to have some discretionary income. But when that happens, we definitely like to see solid investment in infrastructure, and we really solidly believe that the internet can improve people's lives. In pretty much any line of work, you can use it to increase your income, to reduce annoyances in life. So we really like to see pervasive, unconstrained connections, and we believe that opens up a phenomenal number of possibilities.
Now, Norm, you're the panel's expert on carrier costs and revenue metrics and sort of the financial health of an industry that is measuring possibly the wrong things.
Right.
Explain what you mean by that.
Well, it's you know, the term wireline economics is a pretty proven economic structure. And when you look at wireless, the costs of spectrum and backhaul are just, you know, significant, where it erodes a lot of the margin in wireless. So when you see, you know, this term small cells on the wireless side, you know, being, you know, a huge growth opportunity for the next couple of years, you're going to see the wireline network get pushed further into the wireless infrastructure because you're going to have more small cells everywhere in the enterprise, in facilities like we're in today, at stadiums, and just, you know, extending the macro wireless network. And when you do that, you're actually extending the wireline economics and principles further out into the wireless world. And, you know, the wireline economics are great. They're good. They're substantiated. They're, you know, the cost per gigabyte is reasonable. I would say that, you know, there's profitability there. On the wireless side, when you're streaming video over a very expensive spectrum and have to have your own carrier grade, you know, gigabit Ethernet backhaul to it, I think that takes a lot. It raises the cost per gigabyte up significantly and reduces the profitability of the service. So I see, you know, I see with small cells, the economics getting a little better as long as they're engineered, you know, the right way, like an IT Wi-Fi hotspot, and not like a network costly proprietary solution, right?
Yeah, I agree. Norman's perspectives about the backhaul. So as a mobile telecommunication operators, we haven't been taking care of backhaul lines maybe 5 years, 6 years. But to have small cells, maybe 50 meters or 10 meters cell size in very high density areas, backhaul issue is more and more important to solve. So real winner can be a real estate company or convenience stores, whatever. Whatever that brings backhaul lines for small cells or Wi-Fi stations, that is a winner, and also real takers.
Yeah,
That's
so
my
the
opinion.
one other point I would make, the reason why Untethered and Wi-Fi exists is really because backhaul is so expensive, right? And I know this changes in different countries and geographies,
I see.
but from my perspective, the reason why you connect on a Wi-Fi network and the carriers want you to is because you're on the internet. You're not on the carrier mobile packet core network. So once a mobile network operator can create a small cell or a cell site where that backhaul is over the internet, then you get to equality of economics, right?
Yes, I agree.
And, you know, I would suggest or recommend, in my experience with carriers, that should be something that should be looked at from an industry perspective. How can I reduce my cost per gigabyte? How can I re-engineer the mobile broadband network for internet economics? How can I put as much of my traffic as I can on a public internet model and still maintain the security, privacy, and quality of experiences as I can today?
There's some interesting coordination issues that happen as this occurs too. With the traditional macro model, it could have been really strategic, your tower siting, your backhaul. But as you collapse down, and especially if you're using Wi-Fi or other unlicensed frequency, looking at DAS and small cell, microcell, there are only so many places you can drop these locations and you can actually backhaul out of. And so in markets where operators are cooperating more and sort of viewing it as how do we get it out there, and then we really compete on quality of service and our marketing and other things instead of who managed to lock up strategic real estate first and try and exclude others. The general level of happiness and the ability to get people to pay has been much higher and better, and so seeing more cooperation between carriers is more important as you shift to this, because it's not the traditional land grab. Whoever manages to, you know, get the high hill and place the big macro cell that can blast out really cheaply just doesn't exist anymore. You need that for rural coverage, you need that for, you know, the wide broad, but the infill everybody has to work together. It's the only way that it works.
So is anybody in the audience who is in the wireline business now beginning to realize, wait a second, what these guys are saying is that the primary function of the landline network is backhaul for the mobile network, or in my case, as a consumer, support for my Wi-Fi connections in my house, because, well, they're actually, for me as a consumer, there are two things I want from my fixed network. Video, because I don't want to put that on my mobile for obvious financial reasons, and Wi-Fi for all my digital appliances in the home. And that's the function of the landline network, aside from backhaul for B2B purposes. But that gets back to your question, Norm, about the industry having delivery costs that are simply out of line with the way that end users like me or business users will want to use the entire fixed network. And it's not going to go away. We all agree on that. But the economic opportunity for this, to me, looks like it's getting more hairy every day.
I think the economics will drive out the solution because it always does. And I think when you look at the mobile network and pure mobility, I kind of asked myself a question: why do we need another internet? Right? I mean, we don't need another mobile internet. We should just use the internet. And there's no reason to create this whole second mobile internet. So I kind of fundamentally believe that extending the wireline network and internet principles to the wireless network as much as possible will get to a better economic structure for the industry, and will improve the extension of mobility and the usability of it.
Do any of you believe that actually where we stand today for wireline prices relating specifically to broadband in any of the countries that you're aware of, are the costs actually where they need to be? Leave revenue aside for the moment, because you got to figure out a way to do revenue, but fixed costs is a big deal for the telecom world. Are those costs where they need to be? And if they're not, what do we do to get them down further?
I mean, I think that the cost per gigabyte for a wireline cost per gigabyte, the wireless cost per gigabyte needs to equal the wireline cost per gigabyte.
Or your shorthand would be cost in line with name inserted here.
That's right. I mean, I think,
It's quite difficult to make.
I think, if I was an executive at a carrier, specifically maybe even a mobile operator, I would have a mandate to reduce my cost per gigabyte to be to the equivalence of a Google cost to deliver content. My mandate would be, I am not going to lose on cost. So if I'm a carrier and my cost is $6 a gigabyte to deliver a piece of video or any content, I need to get it down to $1 a gigabyte, right? I don't know Google's cost per gigabyte. I don't know if anybody does. I don't even know if they do. Maybe they do.
I don't think people can buy bandwidth that cheap in most cases.
That's right. But it needs to. That's the point, I guess, is the cost structures of mobility need to be reduced significantly, and they need to get down as close as possible as the wireline cost per gigabyte.
I have small objections about that because the spectrum is limited. So in Japan, the DOCOMO has been given 180 megahertz band. AT&T, Verizon, I guess also they have been given 110, 120 megahertz bandwidth. Then as far as the bandwidth is limited, so we cannot offer the same equal pricing to comparison to wired lines. So what's your
Yeah, the spectrum is very expensive everywhere globally, and I think that is a difference. I mean, obviously, spectrum is all the auctions and the amount of money the government's raised to sell spectrum increases the cost per gigabyte for wireless. So maybe it can never really get down to the same cost per gigabyte as wireline, but there's a lot of opportunity to get cost reduced out of that infrastructure. And I'm probably picking on backhaul, more than anything else. in converting backhaul to be more of a, internet-based backhaul, or put it on the enterprise LAN network, or different ways to do that, because spectrum is definitely a big cost, and backhaul is a big cost also.
Not all backhaul is created equal. I mean, if you can get it onto good fiber, that's fantastic. Obviously, that's everybody's first choice. That's the most scalable. That's your best option. But for the vast majority of the world, including large parts of the US, copper is the outside plant. It still rules. It's out there. It's decaying. Loop quality is going down. And this takes significant investment. Pushing fiber further out, looking at GFast and vectoring and faster technologies. You can't economically take fiber all the way to the user in many cases. So how do you push out and find the lowest cost to get a bit from the user via whatever device they're using and whatever intermediary networks back into your core becomes a big question. And this is going to require ongoing investment. It's not as though there's enough out there. There's lots of infrastructure deployed, but it has to be maintained, and that takes effort. So it's not just how do you make it cheaper, but how do you invest so that over time it becomes less and less expensive and you have a more maintainable plant that's more flexible.
But there's also the issue, again, when you were bringing up the question of spectrum, a lot of people base their business plans on the use of unlicensed spectrum. And depending on where you are in the world, there's quite a bit of that spectrum out there. So the issue is, can that spectrum be released to entrepreneurs in each country, and will people with money back those entrepreneurs to do all kinds of, white spaces in the US and so on and so forth. I don't think we're limited necessarily in terms of, if you're a person who wants to get broadband to end users and you want to make a profit doing it, but you want your customers to be able to afford it, you don't necessarily have to stick with fiber always, or DSL always, or cable modem always, or even in licensed LTE spectrum always. I mean, there are other ways to do this, and there are trade-offs in terms of quality and that sort of thing, but we have a lot of terrain to play with here that I think we're not limited to licensed spectrum only.
Speaking of Japan's white space discussion or unlicensed band discussion is not so hot, because speaking of first countries, Korea and Japan have been well equipped with fiber everywhere, fiber. But nowadays, now we are having the problems, backhaul issues. Then just a white space discussion just started in urban areas. Then in contrast, US has been suffering from last mile issues and also backhaul issues. Then I understand why WiMAX on the white space is a very hot topics in this country.
Yeah. Density is very good when it comes to networks, generally speaking, except when you've got interference between Wi-Fi hotspots. Long loop lengths, of course, are always very costly. But I'm thinking in many parts of the world, the developing markets are really growing fast, and those people are going to use broadband, and no question they're coming onto the net. And in those places, a lot of rural areas, we're going to be looking at cost parameters that, we're talking about cost per gigabyte here. We're talking orders of magnitude possibly lower cost for those areas.
So in a lot of those markets, the real challenge isn't the technical or being able to deploy. You can do amazing things with unlicensed. We do a number of Wi-Fi experiments in developing markets. The real challenge is coming up with a viable business model. In markets where people are largely unbanked, it's really difficult. Even if people wish to pay you, it's extremely difficult for them to do so. And so finding ways where you can feasibly build out and have people provide funds to keep it viable and sustainable is surprisingly difficult. And when you sit in the US or North Asia, Western Europe, where everybody has an international capable credit card, you think all these problems are very solvable. And it ends up being some very fundamental challenges of people see value in these services, they will buy them, but they don't have an effective mechanism. So you're not even in the technology realm, you're just in basic business issues.
Yeah. Recharging my devices, for example, how do I get that done? How easy is that?
So let me go back to unlicensed band. Yeah, I'm personally expecting 5 gigahertz unlicensed band for remedy for urban side Wi-Fi offloadings. But my concern is again, speaking of unlicensed band, eventually we will see some contaminations or interference amongst different unlicensed band operators. Not operator means just owners. So, yeah, theoretically, I prefer organized licensed band coordinations for urban side solution.
And I can't imagine any tier one carrier anywhere saying anything other than that.
Well, that's right. I think, you know, no carrier I know would do a rollout on unlicensed spectrum. And when you look at some of the rural areas or, you know, difficult places to get network connectivity to, you need to have a different approach. And, you know, I've seen some approaches that have, you know, LTE kind of radios with satellite backhaul. You know, I've seen, carriers, it's very difficult for them to serve those markets, right? Because the cost per gigabyte in those markets is just, you know, too high. So I think there's going to be, you know, needs for, or, you know, solutions will evolve that, you know, will solve, you know, broadband and bringing it to rural areas that needs to be, you know, cost driven. And I think those will be supported. I think unlicensed may have a role in some of that, but you know, I think carriers, you know, would be very, you know, challenged to support that and do that.
Yeah, many years ago, I used to own a small part of a dial-up ISP. I mean, there used to be such things. And I went to a conference of dial-up ISPs and get on this boat cruise, and I think we were in Oregon on some river or something. And the guys were saying, where is the money in our business? And I said, oh, you want the good news or the bad news? And they said, well, give us the good news first. I said, most of the money in that business is in access. And they didn't want to hear that because they were complaining that the money they were making from access wasn't enough. I said, most of the money's in access. So, I mean, if we ask that question in the broadband business, where is most of the money? Today, the answer would be still best effort access, would it not? And I'm not saying that's the only revenue stream that people should be working on, but that's the foundation of the whole business going forward, it seems to me, still.
Content.
Yeah,
I mean,
on the top.
people are willing to pay for content still.
Yeah.
For top tier content, you can monetize off of that. The triple play providers in a lot of cases are supporting the other two services off of the entertainment content. So if you have, you know, top tier fresh entertainment content, people are very willing to pay that around the world. The other services, it depends. Some people see
so
value,
it's
some
video
don't.
and bandwidth-based services of some kind.
That's right. I mean, it's very, you know, the consumer, you know, rules the industry, right? So they buy the device they want, and they go get the content they want. So, you know, you're going to see a continued focus on the consumer driving, you know, the devices they want, and then what which access or carrier mechanism they want. And quite frankly, you know, the last couple consumer surveys that were done is they hate the carrier. Actually, when you do an industry, cross-industry consumer survey out of who the consumer, you know, doesn't like the most, it used to be the financial banks and things like that, but now it's the carrier is the one they hate the most. And when the calls drop, they won't even call anymore. They'll just go blog about it or tweet about it and complain to all their friends. Because they think calling the carrier will make a difference. So, you know, so yes, they're looking at it as, you know, a connection that always works, and they can get to whatever content they want, and they're willing to pay for some of that incremental content. But then when you look at the unfortunate things that have happened with some of the natural disasters, most recently, I guess on the east coast of the United States, Sandy, this hurricane came by, and mobility went out. All the carriers. They couldn't, you know, respond to all the people. You know, some of the sites went out, and then some of the, you know, people couldn't connect because there were too many people trying to use, you know, the network at one time. So when it's out, that's when everyone complains, right? But when it's there, they all kind of take it for granted, right? And they can get to whatever content they want.
Or typhoons, same thing.
Yeah, but that's not depends on mobile, not the wired. Okay, so all connections are run out when having a disasters. For example, 2 years ago, we had in Japan we had a big earthquake in east coast of Japan. Then everything ran out, including wired and wireless lines. One issue is, on that day. Okay, usually our spectrum is already occupied by a video, 60%. 60% of our spectrum is occupied by video streaming, video content download. Even on that day, 60% of our spectrum is occupied by video. So we need some regulatory issues.
Yeah, watching television isn't the mission critical application.
Right.
Yeah, or messaging or calling to our families or blah, blah, blah. Such things is the most important, most prioritized one. But video, we couldn't do anything about videos on that day.
Well, the other thing that's happened in terms of the way that end users view services like voice is, of course, after we got mobility, we decided mobility is more important than voice quality because, generally speaking, mobile phones don't have voice qualities because it's landline. But then we've also discovered, I think, that the whole notion of what is emergency service, not just in a natural disaster, but in other relatively normal situations, I don't know the last time we've done a major upgrade of like the 911 system in the US. And of course, what that means is as we turn off the public network and we go to IP, we probably should use things like text messaging, SMS, instant messaging, and all the other channels we've got available, even in fact, if many of those channels are mobile channels, not fixed line anymore. But IP is supposed to protect us from disasters. I mean, it just makes sense that we're going to have to do that kind of migration as well. There have been some horror stories recently about how well 911 doesn't work in the U.S., frankly. In fact, I heard a story that the last engineer who actually worked on code for some of the older tandem switches has now retired. So no one...
There's no more.
Yeah, well, if you wanted to fix the code, I don't know that you could fix it anymore.
Well, I think some carriers, some mobile network operators have seen the erosion of their SMS, right, and text messaging, so they're starting to come up with SMS to 911. So they're always looking for new enhancements to some of these data services like SMS to actually, retain some of their messaging revenue. And the highest margin data services, SMS being one of the highest margin data services there.
Okay, so I'm getting Andy.
Well, so on the emergency services, there's a lot of work on the policy and protocol level and trying to handle it. You have some inherent challenges when you do have disaster. You're going to have a massive influx and trying to tier that out, but there's not a tremendous amount of attention paid to the interconnectivity between networks and that interop. And in many countries, there really isn't terribly rich local interconnect, and you can have really bad partitioning. A few of the countries in Southeast Asia have had natural disasters that have effectively cut off entire operators' customer bases from emergency services, which is pretty scary. I mean, obviously, we would much prefer to see interconnect happen on reasonable commercial terms, but when you don't have incentive for them to interconnect, and interconnect in many places, not just one major metro, you can have these events where you end up with partitioning that you may have spent all the time in the world and invested in all sorts of fantastic emergency services, communications equipment, and it's meaningless because you've effectively segmented or critical pieces of it are just gone.
So if I had to sum up, and I do have to sum up what we've been talking about, it would be along the lines that, the fixed network isn't going away, we all agree on that, but the lead roles of the fixed network probably are going to change. They're probably still too expensive to operate and build. We need to do things about that, and certainly Google wants to show that it can be done different ways. Probably, though, that mobile is the driver of most of the application innovation right now in our business. Whether we're doing it or Google's doing it, that's clearly where things are happening. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much for listening. Panelists, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.